Hey guys, this is Matt Gurney. This is another episode of On the Line. Nova Scotia is a tinderbox. So is your brain when you plug it into social media. This is On the Line. This episode of On the Line is brought to you by Airbnb. To solve the housing crisis, Canada needs 5.8 million new homes by 2030. And while some think short-term rentals like Airbnb are taking homes away, that's just not the case. Because, according to Statistics Canada, the number of Airbnbs that could be converted into long-term homes amounts to only 0.6% of Canada's housing stock. How can you solve the problem when you're focused on less than 1% of the housing market? To learn more, visit Airbnb.ca/closerlook. Hey guys, this is going to be an unusual episode. Two completely different stories, one of them more on the breaking news front. I was a little reluctant to record this because podcasts aren't as fast as TV or radio. Will this go obsolete? Well, fingers crossed, because my topic was the burn ban and walking ban and social activity ban in Nova Scotia because of the risk of wildfires there. This is exploding, no pun intended, all over social media. But I'm not interested in that part because the Nova Scotia government has said that they are basically having almost, you call it a lockdown of provinces, wooded areas in the province. And I'm looking at thousands of people online all relitigating their old COVID arguments. And I'm just not interested in that. I'm sorry, maybe I should be, but I'm not. When someone argues the different side of the issue in 2025 than they did in 2020, call me, because I'll be interested then. But in the meantime, it's the exact same obligation of the state to manage public safety versus obligation of the state to respect individual freedom. I found it boring and wearying the first time, and I'm not doing it again. But the topic of the fire risk in Nova Scotia, to me, is fascinating. So I went out and I found an expert in fires in Nova Scotia. Denys Prevost is my first guest today. 40 years of experience thereabouts with firefighting in Nova Scotia and in Ontario. He, retired now, joins me from his home in Nova Scotia to talk about what's happening there, why it's happening, and what property owners, homeowners, business owners, whatever it happens to be, can protect themselves. As Denys says, we're going to have more and more of these kinds of fires. What can we do about it? That is our first segment of this episode of On the Line. Denys Prevost, great to have you here on the show. I could try and summarize your career, but do you mind just telling the listeners, the viewers for a minute, who are you? What's your expertise here? Why did I end up reaching out to you?
Well, I'm not sure why you reached out to me, Matt, but I appreciate you doing so. Apparently, I haven't hidden my profile well enough on social media. So,
I'm very good at finding people. No, the honest answer was because I was looking at historical reports, just news reports on fires in Nova Scotia. And you were quoted as just an authority in that. If I'm correct, you're a career firefighter.
Yeah, I've spent almost 40 years as an active firefighter. I was a volunteer firefighter here in Nova Scotia for about almost 19 years, and then I moved to Ontario, and I eventually ended up as a career fire chief, actually, in 3 different municipalities: county, town, and city municipalities, and did that for about 19 years. So overall, just shy of 40 years as an active firefighter, and I now do consulting. I do consulting for municipal governments relating to their fire protection services, mostly in Nova Scotia, and I've done work for the courts, for instance, for lawyers relating, in fact, to wildland fires. I was involved in one of those as an expert. So I've an enduring interest, of course. And in May of 2023, I almost lost my house to a major wildland fire in the Halifax region. It wasn't the biggest fire in Nova Scotia that was ongoing at the time, but it was quite devastating. 151 houses lost and hundreds and hundreds more, and close to 20,000 people evacuated. I was out of my house for 2 weeks. It was a week before I even knew if the house was still standing or not. So So I have firsthand experience of how things can go very badly wrong, and people doing things that they think are safe and when in fact aren't. And the result was that.
There is, it's funny. I mean, look, I'm not going to claim to have ever experienced anything like that, but my family has had a property in a rural area a few hours from Toronto for 4 generations. No particular history of wildfires. Every once in a while, someone throws a cigarette in a dumb place, or there's a lightning strike or something. So it's not like fires are unheard of, but they've always been immediately knocked out either by the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources or local fire departments. And they're having a hell of a time doing it this year. There are now a series of uncontrolled wildfires in my area. I'm not sure if you guys had this in Nova Scotia or anything like this, but we in Ontario had a nasty ice storm in the winter that brought down an enormous number of trees and tree branches. And I was just golfing last week, and in the golf course, half the tree canopy has been destroyed. And that's all just dead wood sitting on the ground. And I was saying to my father, I was golfing with him, if they don't clean this up, they are one careless cigarette away from a hell of a fire.
Yeah, but normally those types of debris, like we get hurricanes here, and the last one was Hurricane Fiona, which happened in I want to say September or October of 2022, about 8 months before the wildland fires that we had here. So were they a significant contributor of fuel towards that fire? Sure, they were. But that's not the reason the fire started. That's not the reason the fire progressed like it did. We had extremely dry weather at that time, and we're having even much drier weather now because then it was in May, so it was before what they call the green up in the spring. So things are very dry over for the winter. And the last several winters here, we've had less than normal snowfalls. Yeah. Last year, we had very little. We haven't had rain here in over 2 months, besides maybe a little splattering here and there. And so things are very dry. I was out for a ride on my motorcycle yesterday, and all the creeks are dry. Most of all the sloughs and the farmland are all dry. Ponds are dry. You can see the bottom. I wouldn't want to be a turtle. So basically, it's extremely dry. The trees are looking very stressed. You can tell just by the leaves if you know. I mean, if you live in the city, you won't get that. But if you live in the country, you can see the trees. Some of the hardwood, the maple trees are actually changing color and dropping their leaves. Yeah. This is like really early. And so there's a lot of stress going on right now. And every single day, there's multiple reports of wildland fires that the local fire departments in Nova Scotia are dealing with. Everything from train set fires to flick cigarettes, which, by the way, is always illegal year round. So essentially, there's a lot of that going on, and most of it's human caused.
You're talking about just the dryness of it all. Look, I'm from telling you the view from central Ontario, not from Atlantic Canada, but I mentioned I was golfing, and I hit a beautiful fairway shot that landed exactly where I wanted it to go, which is rare. And instead of rolling down the fairway, it was like I'd hit that thing into concrete. The ground was so dry that my ball just went bounce, and then it went to a place where I did not want it to go. Yeah. The fairways are cracking, and they are watering them because they got a lake line. They can just pull lake water and water them, but the heat has been so intense it's cracking. I want to ask you a very basic question, and this is probably going to frustrate you because you're going to have 40 years of technical knowledge, and I'm asking you a moronic question here. But in the forest right now, in Atlantic Canada, in Ontario, in Quebec, what is happening? Like at a very basic level, what does no rain and high heat do?
Well, I'm not a forester, so I'm not going to get into the technicals of what's going on. But fires start because initially they're very easy to start. And so that's like the fine fuels. Those are the little grasses and the small strands and the pine needles and all of those things that are sitting on the forest floor. And so a very small ignition source like a cigarette or a spark or a train wheel going by or somebody driving their ATV without a spark arrestor that they're supposed to have and running a chainsaw and hitting a stone with the chain, any of those types of things are, I caught a nice fish. I think I'll fry it up right now, and you don't bother to put it out properly. Or even if you think it's contained and it's not, that will start a fire. And when those fires get going in those fine fuels, then they spread extremely quickly, like faster than you can walk, in some cases faster than you can run, if there's any wind at all. And then what happens, of course, is the bigger stuff is dry also. So the fire gets to embed and the ground is dry and the fire can go deep underground. And so you can get these very, very extreme fires, and sometimes you don't even see all of it. And when I lived in Ontario as a fire chief in Ontario, for instance, we used to have a fires every year in something called the Wainfleet Bog. And the fires there would be 10, 12 or more feet underground. Well, here in Nova Scotia, we've got rock, we've got clay, and then we've got all this organics that have been built up over centuries. And the fires can go way down into the ground and pop up again next year. Never been properly put out because you can't get to them. So stuff is that dry, there's almost nothing that can stop it. And when you got fires going on like that all across the country, which you have, there's a finite number of resources available. Yeah. And they're spread very thin. And we were sending Nova Scotia woodland firefighters, DNR firefighters, to the west to deal with their fires. Well, that depletes us. So we got to bring them back. There's only so many water bombers. Everybody sees these big, beautiful water bombers flying around, dropping water on things. Well, it's not the water bomber that puts out the fires. It's the guys on the ground digging like moles, digging holes, putting water, spending weeks with shovels and saws and pickaxes, working on these things. You can only deal with a certain number before you run out of people who are skilled to do that. And that's the risk that we're running right now if we don't keep control of these fires.
I'm trying to, again, and without your 40 years of experience here, I'm trying to understand why we're having these problems. Is it in very basic terms? And I know you're not a forestry expert, but is it a lack of rain? Because I'm assuming train sparks, cigarettes, ATVs, they aren't new, but we seem to be having worsening problems. Is that because the conditions in the forest have changed or the rain conditions? I'll tell you, man, we have not had more than 30 seconds of rain up at my country place since June.
Yeah, even in Ontario, they're just starting to put the burn bans on in Southern Ontario now. And I just saw a couple of them come on today. Well, it's climate change, man. And you can argue about the why there's climate change. I don't care about the why.
Yeah.
But the reality is it is. I'll tell you, it's over 30 some degrees here today. The humidity is getting down towards, it's actually 40%, which is high, but the wind is coming in off the ocean. But we've had single digit humidities. And this is just not normal for Nova Scotia. It's not normal weather. And the last 5 years for sure, we've really noticed a change in the normal weather swings. We can get really wet and windy. We can get very dry and hot. So you get the stuff in between. It's not all about heat and so forth, but that's what's happening. The forests are drying out. So you stress the hell out of the forest 1 year, and then you run a hurricane through it, and then you have a modestly wet year the next year, and then you stress the hell out of it again. The trees are like people, right? The more you stress them, the more fragile they get. And so over time, the forests become more fragile and more susceptible to these extreme weather events. And that's what's happening.
I want to ask you a big picture question. And I don't know if there's an easy answer to it, but I'm thinking whatever has gone wrong here, and I tend to agree with you about what's happened, but we won't even get into that. We're going to be dealing with this for a long time, potentially the rest of our lives. What should we be doing to be better able to deal with it? Do we need more firefighters, more water bombers? Is this a forestry management thing? Do we need to design our cities differently or our rural communities? I'm not trying to be defeatist here, but I don't think we're going to stop this, and I don't know what we're going to do about it.
Well, the answer to all of that is we need to exercise our most valuable human trait, and that's being intelligent and planning for the future and making the changes that we've got to do to basically live with these things. If you have a piece of property and it's surrounded by trees or surrounded by dry grass, you need to take steps to make sure that you're not going to lose your property when you have a fire. Fires are inevitable. When the woods are very dry like this, you're going to have fires. But the problem is how much damage do they do? I mean, they do damage to the wildlife. They do damage to the ecosystem. They make it much easier to have floods and landslides afterwards. They have all of these knock-on effects. But the most important thing from a people perspective is people are concerned about losing their homes, losing their possessions, losing their lives. And don't kid yourself, that's happening. We had a Nova Scotia firefighter was killed not too long ago where a tree fell on him, a burnt tree. So, that happens. I'm just telling you it does. So we need to be thinking more along the lines of, yeah, that won't happen to me. No, that's not true. You need to be thinking along the lines of, how do I keep this from happening to me personally? How do I what steps do I take as a member of society or a responsible member of society, so to keep it from happening to somebody else through my actions and all of those things. And, managing the woodlands, yeah, that's all part of it. Fire is a natural thing, having that. But, climate change is happening also. And unless we want to be like the dinosaurs and die off through some action of our own or not, then we need to use our big brain and be smarter about how we deal with this stuff.
Denis, anytime someone tells me that the solution is human intelligence, I get real nervous.
I didn't say common sense.
Yeah. One last question for you here, and it flows out of what you were just saying. Interesting. I'll start just with this anecdote that up north, up in cottage country, neighbors, sometimes full-time residents, sometimes seasonal. They're looking at that woodlot behind all the cottages, and they're looking at it a different way. They're like, this used to be a nice backdrop, and you'd hear the birds chirping, but now we're starting to wonder if we should move this thing back 30 feet. Clean it up, thin it out, build more of a fire break here. Do you have, in very big picture terms, how do people get involved in this? Like literally, if someone out there is listening to this episode and they're thinking, yeah, you know what, maybe I should do this. Where do they go? How do you even start this process?
You take personal responsibility for your own property. That's what you do. And you get involved in meeting objectives of hardening your property, making your property less susceptible to damage by wildland fires. And you get involved in this Fire Smart program. They're the ones that are very much involved right now. You can look it up online. It gives you all kinds of information, things you should do with your home, ways you should be maintaining your home and so forth to protect it, or your cottage, if it's your cottage, whatever the case may be, and talking about those things. And I took those steps before the fires came through here, because I knew there was going to be a fire. It was just a question of the when. I mean, you live in the forest. I lost all my trees and lost the siding of my house, but my house is still here. And we lost 1 in 3 homes in our neighborhood. So you need to be looking at those things, and you can do that. Now, the forest that's beyond your place, that may be a concern, and one can always talk to the people who own the property about what are they going to do about it. But essentially, if there's a bad forest fire and the wind is blowing in your direction, you're going to be in this massive stream of burning embers that are going to come flying onto your property. Even if the fire was a kilometer away, you're still going to get it. It's going to be coming your way. So your job is to make sure that when that stuff lands on your house, lands on your deck, lands on your property, lands under your deck or anywhere else, that it does not get established as a fire and burn your place down. Now, you've got control over that. So take control where you have it, and then also have a plan to bug out if you have to.
Denis, we didn't have to used to think this way, but obviously some people did. Obviously, people have been living on the edge of the woods for a long time, or you and your professional colleagues. But I think I'm one of the many Canadians out there who has never really had to worry about this before, because the heavy rains we were used to every summer, we wouldn't worry about it. It's like, well, it's pretty dry out there today, but look at Thursday. It's going to be 25 millimeters of rain. There's 2 millimeters of rain in the forecast for the next 14 days, and there's only a 30% chance of that. We're just not getting the water we used to.
That is true, but every time it rains, the grasses grow. And when it's not raining, the grass is dry. And when the grasses are dry, they can burn. So every year there is a risk, every year. Some years the risk goes to extremes. This is one of those years. And if it means closing the woods, then that's necessary. If it means reminding people not to be a flicking idiot with their cigarette butts, then you need reminding, obviously, because I see you every day. So anyway, it just goes on from there.
I saw a guy having a smoke outside. I was driving, and he was having a smoke outside. He looked like he needed a smoke too. He was obviously going through some stuff. He and I made eye contact, and he so obviously butted out on the gravel, and I gave him a little thumbs up. So he understood why I was looking at him. Denys, thank you for this. Glad your house made it, and I really appreciate your expertise. Thanks for joining me today.
Take care. And everybody, pay attention to this stuff. It's important. You don't want to be burned out. It's the worst day of your life. Well, almost.
This episode is also brought to you by the Métis Nation of Ontario. 22 years ago, the Supreme Court of Canada made history. In R.V. Powley, the existence of a rights-bearing Métis community in Ontario was affirmed. The next year, Ontario signed a harvesting agreement recognizing the Métis. Since then, governments have invested significantly in Métis people in Ontario for better healthcare, education and training, jobs, housing, and for programs that protect the environment and keep Métis language, culture, and communities alive. Now, some would take that away. They would erase those hard-won rights and undo more than 20 years of progress. But the law and history are clear. The Métis aren't going anywhere. To learn more, visit OntarioMétisFacts.com. Many thanks to Denys Prevost, retired firefighter, almost 4 decades of experience in Nova Scotia and Ontario, including at senior officer levels in municipal and county fire departments. I'm going to go check out what he told me to. There's more I could learn about this, so I'm not going to wait around. I'm going to go read some of that. My next segment, though, is a wild tonal shift. I guess we could make a pun about our brains are burning down. Andrew McDougall is my next guest. He is a director at Trafalgar Strategy based in London, the United Kingdom, but also former communications director for Stephen Harper, the former prime minister. He's also a regular contributor at The Line. He wrote an op-ed for us. Last week we published it about why we need to start effectively, I don't want to call it taxing, but tolling maybe is a better word, putting some kind of direct user fee on social media. I understand that this would be hard to do. I have kind of political philosophical objections to that kind of meddling in the free market. But as we get into in the conversation, I had to confess to him, I agree with him what the problem is, and I haven't been able to come up with a better solution yet. It's a fascinating conversation, and it doesn't just cover social media today. Andrew also tells us about what he was doing. When he was comms director for Harper almost 20 years ago, social media was this weird niche thing. Now it's the only political battlefield. We talk about that. We talk about the problem. We talk about some potential solutions. Here is Andrew McDougall on the line. Andrew McDougall, I want to start with something, an anecdote, and then we can get into talking about social media. I had an absolutely terrifying experience the other day, just the past weekend, where I woke up in the morning. I stretched, I went pee, I brushed my teeth, and then I picked up my phone and I looked at it, and I had an Instagram friend request. I don't really use Instagram. I have an Instagram account, but I don't use it much. And I looked at it, and it was from my 12-year-old daughter. I didn't know she had Instagram.
Cool.
And when I looked at it, I discovered that, in fact, she's had it a while, and she has quite a few followers. Now, I've looked through it, and it seems to be harmless. It's her friends from school. It's my mom. I'm not too worried about the content pool yet, but I got to be honest with you here. I have increasingly bleak feelings about social media, and my daughter's 12. She's heading into adolescence. I'm trying to imagine what my adolescence would have been like if I'd had access to a high definition camera, a portable light speed data communication device linked into the entire world, and a brain full of hormones. And it probably wouldn't have gone well for me or a lot of the people around me here. You wrote a specific paper recently for the McDougall Laurier Institute. You wrote an op-ed for The Line based on it. But let's zoom out for a minute here. Let's talk a little bit about your overall view of social media and how you got there.
Yeah, I mean, look, and as the father of 2 girls, one who's 9 and one who's 6, I'm going to be in that point where you are right away. And it scares the hell out of me when you look at all those things you mentioned. It's a hard thing enough being a teenager, being a young girl, particularly in that. And remember the old days, I used to have to keep up with the Joneses, and that was like the proto family on your street that had a bit more than you, the nicer car, the nicer house, nicer wardrobe, and that was hard enough. Now you're a young woman, and as you say, you're ported into the world. You compare yourself not to Susie Jones down the street, but Kim Kardashian, Kylie Jenner, all these people that have more money, more endorsements, that post this great life. And of course, it's not a great life. It's snapshots that from anybody's life can be made to look good. And you compare your average day to everyone else's best day, and then you feel terrible about yourself. So I feel that pain, but my view is kind of matured along with my professional life. And These things weren't a thing, until the mid-aughts, and you started getting the Facebook, then Facebook. And in those early days, it was very much a useful service. Like, here are some people I've fallen out of touch with. I can connect with my old friends. I can see what they're up to. They can see what I'm up to. Isn't that great? And then what changed? What changed for me? So as I moved into politics in 2006, obviously you're looking for tools and techniques to kind of get your message out and all that stuff. And that brings a whole host of other problems. But personally, what went from being very useful services to me quickly, as they needed to find a way to pay for all of this stuff they were hosting. And they didn't ask us for money. They just decided, they took a decision, and you can track this decision to when Sheryl Sandberg comes to Facebook from Google and says, we're going to monetize by moving to an ad-based business model. So we're going to sell ads against content. And good news is we have to pay for any of the content because people do that for us for free. But what they did is they organized our pages into a feed. And then the battle becomes, how do we get people to stay on that feed? And what can we show them? Do we show them news? Remember Farmville, all the games, is it updates from your friends? And it just became, we got locked in this ratchet system of needing more things to make people stay for longer on these platforms. And the competition then became, who has the more addictive platform? And that's kind of, if you zoom forward to where we are now, some of the richest, most powerful companies in the world are in an arms race for our attention. And guess what? They'll use whatever they can. Real stuff, fake stuff, important stuff, trivial stuff, whatever it takes to keep people, including people as young as your daughter, on the platform. And they use cognitive psychology against us. All the little heuristics and biases and our brains have, they just exploit that stuff and keep us stuck. So yeah, I've kind of come to hate it just like you. And I think it doesn't say a lot of good things about ourselves in the societies we've let ourselves get to this point without really challenging it at any point along the way.
There was a joke that went around the internet about a year ago that my friends and I did, where we were out for drinks at a pub. And basically, it's called the Instagram personality test, which is you click sort of the search icon on Instagram and you look at what it suggests for you. Mm. And it is a shockingly and often unflattering, unflattering but extremely accurate summary of what it knows about you. And my friends and I were laughing, right? Because in every case, we're all guys in our early 40s. In every case, it was like beautiful young actresses. And then whatever.
Sydney Sweeney in there, I'm sure.
A lot of Sydney Sweeney, yeah. But mixed in with whatever our specific hobby was. And, so for me, like the joke my friends were tormenting me about was like scrolling through mine. It was Starship, Sydney Sweeney, Starship. And like for one of my buddies who was like really getting into his golf game, it was golf, Sweeney, golf. And in every, like, we can laugh about this, but this actually was an accurate reflection of what the social media company, based on our preferences, what our behavior, it had learned what is likely to get our attention. It wasn't showing us things we have no interest in. And if you've probably done this. If you ever want to run a really interesting experiment, delete all your Google or Facebook data, make it forget everything it knows about you, and then see how long it takes for the advertisements to start making sense again. Because the last time I did this, it was very funny because all of a sudden these companies don't know anything about me. And the ads I'm getting, it's like, look, man, I got spark plugs or maternity wear. Like, is anything here of interest to you? And then I wasn't engaging with any of that. But after about 6 weeks, all of a sudden, every ad is accurate again because it learns you very quickly. One of the humbling things about this, Andrew, is we're finding out that human beings, including you and I, we're much simpler than we think. We have very basic motives and we're very easily pleased and entertained.
Yeah, 100%. And that, I think if you look through history and the rise of mass communication, mass media, the premise has always been, Matt, look, this will make us better, smarter, more noble, et cetera. So obviously we went from kind of a print-based society in the 19th century. And as you flip into the early 20th century, you get obviously the telegraph first that comes, but then eventually radio. And radio was going to educate us. No, it was just a great way for Orson Welles to scare the crap out of the entire city of New York and get them to panic in War of the Worlds, right? And then TV came along, and TV was going to be something that could educate everyone. Well, no, guess what? It wasn't. And then the internet came along, And it's porn and trivia. And that's, I think it speaks to the point we're just making, is that our brains are they're made for a world that is not this world. It is made still evolutionarily for the savannah, right? Our ability to spot danger, our ability to react to stimulus is all geared off a world of scarcity. And we are now in a world of plenty. And that plenty is information. And we are by nature information foragers. We like to look around, see what we're offered, say, oh, I'm reading this. Is this better? And you used to have to physically do things to move. You know, if you didn't like the day's paper, you had to wait till the next day's paper. You had to go find a book and go get that book. Now everything just comes to us in a feed. And I think if you look, and I cannot recommend this book enough to everyone, a man named Neil Postman wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death about 30 years ago about television and its impact on the news and the consumption of serious information. And his thesis was that basically we amuse ourselves to death. We will take the kind of storyfication and Hollywoodization of the news. That's what television news became, and rolling news, cable news. And the internet is just that on steroids. And you cannot deal with complex public policy issues in that kind of environment. And, you know, I think you can do politics by meme. You can't do government by meme. And I think everything just kind of skips along the surface now. And as you say, tagged to us by what we show the system. And what we show the system is, like, I like my football. Like if you did that experiment to me, I would have kind of Chelsea FC, a variety of players, and like a little bit of wine probably on there. But even, and just to get your point, like what used to take 6 weeks. I mean, the great lesson of TikTok is they don't even need you to prime the system anymore. And that algorithm can figure you out in 30 minutes, most. And the response then from the other companies, principally Meta, is Instagram now looks more like TikTok. They want you on the Reels videos. And I had the misfortune of being kind of horribly transfixed, as we all are by tragedy, of that Air India plane kind of going up and coming down. And suddenly I'm getting all manner of aviation disaster videos. And we're humans. We rubberneck the car crash. We look at that stuff because it is, to our mind, something you don't see all the time. A plane falling out of it. I see planes go up and land all the time. I don't see them fall out. We respond to that novelty. And we have now an information economy, Matt, that just ships us a lot of that novelty. And you're right. We're the problem, but we're not helped by a system that makes it easy for us to be our base selves.
I remember, and I'm obviously dating myself a little bit here. When Facebook was new, my girlfriend at the time, Canadian woman, was going to school in the States, and Facebook was out there first. So she had asked me, do you have the Facebook yet? Do you have the Facebook yet? Do you have the Facebook yet? And eventually, all of a sudden, one day, it did expand to Canada and my university, because at the time, Facebook was limited to university students or college students. All of a sudden, my university had it. And I think I was the 6th member of the student body at my school to end up with a Facebook account. And exactly to your point, it was great. It was funny. There were in-jokes. It was a great way to connect with friends, people you hadn't spoken to since high school or even elementary school. And it would ask you, hey, fill in some info about yourself. And I was like, I like the Maple Leafs. I like Rush. And I'm just punching all this stuff into it. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm gonna be joined with other people in this wonderful community of Leaf fans. And what I never realized, because I was like 22 and I wasn't thinking about it, was that I was basically handing over for free an encyclopedia of me.
Yeah.
Everything I liked, and then almost by inference, everything I didn't like, wouldn't have taken. And then on more personal stuff, it knew my birthday, knew where I was from. It knew my sexual preferences, because it just used to say, what are you interested in? Man, woman, both. Like you gave all this stuff away. I would not do that now. And I would hope that we as a civilization would be mature enough now to be a little bit more skeptical. But when these things were shiny and new, it was a stampede to adapt this stuff, because me as the Canadian university student, I was jealous of my girlfriend in the States who she had this, I didn't. And then we had it in Canada, but then parents are like, well, why can't we have the Facebook? Why is it only university email addresses? We as a civilization just dove headfirst into this stuff, and we never thought about what could go wrong.
No, and that if I were to label one broad criticism of technology above all is that they never look at the downside risk of what they're doing, right? They just assume that how can we not be good? We're connecting people, we're bringing information to people, and I think they don't. In the rush in this industry, it is your job to ship as quickly as you can and iterate as quickly as you can. And when you look at the race, these platforms, the major platforms of what's become this attention economy have done is, that they all compete for one thing that only one of them can have at a time. And that I don't think we appreciate enough how different that is from what's come before it. If you think back to the days when you started in newspapers, like I might be a Globe subscriber, I might be a Post subscriber, I could have both. Once I made that payment to each, they pretty much stopped caring about my micro consumption habits of the product. Obviously, they kept trying to give me a good product because they wanted to keep me as a subscriber, but that feedback loop was long or longer. And it wasn't based on my attention at any one second. I could have 10 subscriptions. And as long as I made my way through it at my leisure to my taste, everybody was happy. Now that can't happen. If I'm on Facebook, I'm not on X. If I'm on X, I'm not on TikTok. And if I'm not somewhere, they can't make money off me. And so they will do this dance to make me come back as much as they can using whatever they can. And yes, we reveal all our preferences. And to your point, you don't have to reveal your sexuality anymore. Just what you linger on.
They'll figure it out
a little bit longer. If you look at that handsome picture of the handsome actor a bit longer than Sydney Sweeney on going to a movie premiere, it will figure that out. And that was done. The famous experiment with Facebook was a Polish researcher who was studying here in the UK, and this was all the start of the Cambridge Analytica stuff. Really, show that with 10 clicks. Or 20 clicks that would know you better than your spouse. And that's why I sometimes jokingly call a smartphone the Stasi in your pocket. But it is the Stasi in your pocket, right? It knows where you are, where you aren't. Are you telling your wife the truth about where you are tonight? It knows. It knows your most frequent routes to work. It knows, it knows more about you than you would ever tell to anyone, including your doctor, shrink, priest, spouse, child. And we decided that was fun. Why? Technology is fun. It gives us some things that are good, but we don't see the cost. We don't see, because the externalities of all this are hidden. We don't pay a fee. We don't see the cost that comes to us, but there is a cost. And we're starting to see whether that's mental health. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping having open reign in our democracies, or the gutting of an industry we both care about, the news. We need that news function in society. We need someone shining a light where people don't want it shown. We just need that. And we're losing it like more and more every day, to the point where I can't tell you that's coming back. And I know the line and was created to help try to get around that. But we're losing a lot of institutional checks on power.
The line isn't an offensive instrument. We're not going to retake the ground we've lost. We might be able to defensively hold some of it as everything else goes bonkers around it. You talk about newspapers. So I think most of the viewers and listeners will know this, but I got my start at the National Post. I was there for years before I was senior enough to basically get a peek at the actual audience demographic report. Like, this thing was a trade secret, basically. Yeah. And when I finally glanced through it, it was basically what you expect. And I don't think I'm betraying any trade secrets here. Newspaper readers in general are well educated, they're older, and they're affluent. Like, they skew that way on the population. But what we knew about the audience was not nothing, but it was probably 1/billionth what Facebook knows about me. Mm-hmm. And when someone wants to advertise in a newspaper, you kind of have to basically go, we want a campaign that appeals to upper middle class and higher people with a university degree making more than $100,000 a year. Once upon a time, that was good marketing info. Like, if you could tell marketers that much about your audience, you were doing great. Nowadays, Facebook advertisers, if we're picking on Facebook, it's not just Facebook, it's all of them, will go, I need 38 to 41-year-old single men living in this neighborhood in Toronto. And you will get them. Like, you will find thousands of them will become available, and you will pay a premium to put your message right in front of them here. Before we talk specifically about the proposal you've made in your recent op-ed, I want to ask you a question, a little bit more of your journey here. In your time in politics, how was this stuff used and how did that evolve? And again, no trade secrets here. Just from your own perspective, what was it like in the trenches when this stuff was relatively new?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like the oasis in the desert. The challenge when you're in a political communication role, and that's not a partisan point, is that everybody's quite literally out to get you, right? That's the function. Every day my interaction as a press secretary of director of communications is a bunch of really skeptical, hard-nosed bastards coming after me, going like, "Why are you lying to me about what you're doing?" And that, in that kind of environment, so you had to borrow somebody else's audience. If I wanted to get the government's announcement about whatever out, you would have to make the case to journalists, specific publications. You'd have to tailor that for broadcast or print, depending on what it was. And you would have to advance an argument with enough merit and seriousness to it that it could withstand a bit of scrutiny. Because if I were to go to someone like you and lie my face off, you would very quickly figure out that I was lying my face off. And it wouldn't make it in the paper or the broadcast. Or I would burn you once and you'd put it in there and everybody else would figure out it was not true. And then I was dead to you. And
I would never take your call again.
Yeah, exactly right. So there was an inherent relationship there where you knew you couldn't. And that's not to say like you knew when I was dancing, because I couldn't say something that you knew was true, but I wouldn't lie to somebody. There was a way to get around that. But what these platforms then did is, I think at first the promise was more on the party side. Like, we can know this much about everybody and we can give, those people in those target ridings. And it wasn't quite as specific and granular as it is now, but it was still miles better than most voter ID that you were doing. And you could say, well, this guy liked the military ad, so we'll give them a bit more military. Or this person was more persuaded by the tax cut thing, so we'll give them a bit more tax cut. And then it started bleeding over to the media side, is saying, well, we got to look at these things because, Twitter kind of came around in 07, 08, and, we should get an account. Let's get an account. And then, okay, how are we going to use it? Is the prime minister going to have to know about all this stuff that we're saying? Are we just going to treat it as another broadcast channel? And that's what we did at first, very much. Treat it as a broadcast channel and just another way to say something without a filter. It could just go directly to market, direct to the audience. We could cut the media out. The media would see it, comment on it, and whatever, and you'd go on your merry way and you do that. But then over time, you figured out, there's a bit more give and take in this. We can be a bit more creative. For me, from one perspective, and I think this might have been the first thing I ever wrote after leaving Prime Minister's office, is these platforms revealed a lot of bias to me in the people that covered my office. If I paid enough attention to what reporters were sharing and talking about, I could get a pretty good and I could talk to them all day face to face. And somebody's never going to reveal to me what they think about what the government's doing. It's very straight. Most news reporting was right down the middle. You could not guess. Opinion columnists, obviously you could, but you would see that. And then that would have an impact on how I do my job. I could start to tell the prime minister would always want to know what's everybody talking about before he went to take questions. Like, you used to have to talk to people and then kind of get a sense of what they're interested in. Now you're like, well, everybody's tweeting about X, so you're going to get one about X. And everybody noticed when we were on this foreign trip that this happened, so you're going to get asked about that. And, it felt like magic. I remember a couple of times the prime minister was like, oh my God, you predicted that perfectly. I'm like, oh, it's not like they're telling us. They're putting it out there in the ether. And that, that's the last thing you should want to do as a journalist to somebody in my position, is to show me any of your hand or reveal any of the bias. Because then that and we all know, like, you don't cover politics because you don't care about this stuff and you don't have an opinion about it. But the last thing you want to do is reveal that opinion about it to maintain that sense of neutrality. So that started to go. And then we just started playing in places that politicians wouldn't normally play. We like, very famously had Justin Bieber. We invited, he was doing a concert in Ottawa and prime minister's daughter wanted to go. So the prime minister's going to take him. And they're like, well, we have these Jubilee medals. Do you think his people would take a Jubilee medal if you gave him a Jubilee medal? So we call the manager, Scooter Braun. He's like, yeah, well, sure, we'll do that. Can we bring a camera? Well, no media, but if you want to take your own picture, that's fine. And so we did that. And like Bieber shows up and he's like pie-eyed and he's wearing overalls with like one strip hanging off, and the prime minister's in a suit, and the prime minister's like pinning this medal on the one thing.
I remember.
And so we put we put that picture out, and people just like dumping on Justin Bieber, like, oh my God. And I was at dinner, like either that night or the next night, and Lorene Harper calls me and she goes, Steven's upset. Poor Justin Bieber's getting the crap kicked out of him on Twitter. He just tried to do a nice thing. And I'm like, this is the internet. Welcome to social media. We were figuring out that the dog pile was a thing. And he's like, well, we got to say something. We got to say something. We got to say something. And so the prime minister ended up saying, like, in Justin's defense, I said I'd be wearing overalls too. Right. And that tweet it exploded over, because we had just been doing, the prime minister was here today. The prime minister was there today. Here are the prime minister's remarks. And just showing a bit of personality. You have Variety on the phone. You have the Hollywood Reporter on the phone. You have Rolling Stone on the phone. And you just see these blending of fields and audiences that you would never get in political communication. And so you start tweeting about all the Olympic athletes that are winning medals, and you start doing stuff that's a bit further afield. And we ended up shuffling the cabinet on Twitter first. That was one of the last things I did before I left, was we said, these cabinet shuffles are impossible to get a substantive story out. It's always process, who's in, who's out, who's up, who's down. It's not about what we want to do. So we figured out a way to do it by rolling the ministers in a very particular order about all the new ministers, new women, followed by other new ministers who weren't women, followed by key changes in portfolio. And then everybody who was staying the same came last. And you were able to tell the story through a new medium that just gave the reporters one drip feed to go on. And we didn't pre-brief it. And it was just, that was a demonstration of the power of these things to write the first draft of history. And journalists did not like people like us having any sort of crack at the first draft of history. And Matt, I think so I'll shut up in a second. That is the one thing where you did realize journalists had always had that first crack at what did this all mean. It would then get hardened and codified if it survived into stories and books. But that first cut was always the journalists. With these channels, politicians could have the first cut. People could see the first cut as seen by as defined by the politician, and then see the version that journalists produced. And when those two things did not line up, people saw conspiracy, they saw agenda, what they didn't appreciate was, no, that's the role of the press, not to just take what I say uncritically. It is to pass it through a filter of, is this true? How do we know this is true? Who could corroborate that this is true? What does somebody else have to say about this? And it looked like bias. And that's the thing that these channels have really done, is erode that trust in a profession that is not perfect, has never been perfect, will never be perfect. But the function is to get to what actually happened and why that matters, not just take the world of a self-interested politician who wants to sell you whatever story they have that day.
You've given me a ton to respond to there. First of all, to say, I remember the Bieber picture. I had forgotten it until you mentioned it, but then you started to describe it. I was like, oh my God, I remember that. I'm going to end this with a question, but just to knock off a couple of quick points here. Talking about the first cut or the first swing at, that first draft of history. That's something I've observed in my career, and something my colleagues and I have talked about often, where you phrased it really well. Traditionally, you or people like you or corporate guys or advertising agencies, you had to borrow the mass media's audience. You had a message, but you didn't have an audience. So you had to figure out how to form that message in a way that was of interest to us, and then we would transmit it to our audience. So you had to kind of like play head games with us, and you guys got pretty good at it. One of the things I've observed, just as an interested observer, to repeat the term, brands, political parties, corporations, public figures, influencers, they've cultivated their own audience. They don't need mine.
No.
And, I find it insane, but I'll look at something every once in a while where like local cookie bakery in my neighborhood will have 30,000 social media followers. And if they're doing a sale or if they're introducing a new cookie flavor, they don't need to go to the Toronto Star or CP24 and be like, hey, can we get the baker on for a little nice quality of life segment for like the bottom of the hour? They just go, hey, check out our new cookie. And the media has no role in that. Yep. And when it's cookies, it's benign. When it's a massive multinational corporation that just had a chemical spill that destroyed an ecosystem and killed 300 people, not so good. But they like, you will look at brands that have millions of followers and you can't figure out why, but they can just bypass any independent authority or scrutiny and send their message out. So yes. The other thing I was going to say about bias before I hit you with a question was, you're absolutely right. Reporters who were, and I'm a weirdo columnist, so I'm somewhat exempt from this. I can be asocial and weird, and that not only is it not career limiting, sometimes it's career enhancing to have personality and to have some grit. But reporters who were just straight, like preacher level, straight face, never show a bias. You would have if you read their copy for 30 years, you would have no idea if they voted NDP, Liberal, or Conservative. But they got Twitter or they got Facebook, and they were just blasting their views on everything into the ether. Because for a while, and this is something that Andrew Potter and I were talking about just last week on the Line podcast, for a while, the internet and the real world were separate. Then they just fused. Like the meat space and cyberspace are not that different anymore. And you'd have a reporter showing up at a press conference doing a very straight interview with Premier Ford or Prime Minister Carney or whatever. But people who are convinced he has an agenda have stalked his Facebook page and they've seen what he's liking. And they're like, this guy's a liberal hack. And he might be. But that was just not something we had to deal with before. So here's my last question for you on politics before we'll move on to your proposal for social media. I was covering you and your government back in the Harper days. You guys are pretty good at social media. I thought you actually were using it well. But the next guys came in and they blew you away. The Liberals under Justin Trudeau, they figured this stuff out better. And you and I were talking a few minutes ago about sort of, social media strips you down to your base. Whatever illusions you have about yourself, look at your recommendations. That's the true you. I think the Liberals, and I'm not saying this is a criticism, this is actually in weird way, it's a compliment. I think they figured that out first. I think they sort of had the attitude of, we're going to just be as ruthless and as shameless as we can be, and we're going to get maximum political value out of all these platforms. And they were really good at it for 2 or 3 years. And then either the platforms changed or maybe they just accumulated baggage, but all of a sudden it wasn't cute anymore. You didn't have the prime minister doing the weird heart thing with Bill Morneau. And like but there was this time when like Justin Trudeau basically was prime minister because he was good at Instagram. Yeah. What happened? And then why did that stop working? Because right now when politicians go on social media, it's starting to feel almost more risk than reward. So what do you think's happened in terms of the politics of social media use?
Yeah, I think as ever, things evolve the longer they've been in the wild. And I think, what we took a lot of grief, like any first child, right? Like you get cracked down on it, and then your little kid brother comes and does all the same shit and gets none of the grief, right? And I think that was a bit of Trudeau. So we had done like our own videos and 24/7, which was kind of like a day in the life of the prime minister, wrapping up. And people were like, oh, we're using taxpayer money to film this propaganda that you're putting out. And we started releasing our own pictures. Like I remember like when Jason Ransom, we started pushing out his photos, and some of them were backstage and you didn't get access to it. And we very famously goofed once where I put a picture from the NAC when Harper sang the Beatles, and I didn't realize because it was a practice picture, and so it wasn't from the actual event. And CP had a meltdown, and then they wrote this kind of 1,200 word hit piece on the barbarians in the prime minister's office, taking away the media's function. And so I think we went through all that crap, and then Trudeau came in and was more into it as a person. Like Harper was not one that wanted to. He understood that you had to service these channels. In the 2011 campaign, we did a pretty good job of always having a compelling picture, always having kind of a fun thing that wasn't purely message related, but look, here's the prime minister being a dude. And I think Trudeau just likes that more anyway. Like, if you could just take pictures of Harper in his natural environment, he'd just be reading binders full of information all day. Like that's what it would be like, right? And Trudeau, I don't think people didn't think he was that kind of person. And so, yeah, they leaned into it, and it was the moment from the first cabinet and the message there. And I think like ever, the thing that Harper was always particular about was not wanting to be in the news every day because people just get tired of you.
Yeah.
And I think there was an overexposure element to Trudeau where you just, okay, we get it. We get it from the heart out, Care Bear, all, yeah, okay, with the socks, great. Good the first 10 times, 11, 12, not so great. Show us a bit more. And I think then they got stuck in scandal land with SNC, and then it just kind of, then the blackface, and then it just became, okay, the joke's not funny anymore. And you have to have a bit of there. And I think, and this is the thing we don't talk about enough, Matt, is the amount of time and attention that these platforms take, whether it's people like in my job or leaders, or how many politicians do you sit there and go like, God, do you do nothing all day but this? And no, you're supposed to be doing the legislating, the scrutinizing of bills, not performing for an audience. And I think, to get back to something you said, what ends up happening, no matter who you are on these platforms, is you optimize to your audience.
Yeah.
You're a journalist, and it's like you can see that, like when you can see the chart beat score. Oh, they liked it when I did that story.
Yeah.
Give them more of that story. They didn't like it when I did 3,000 words on the crime bill. Ugh, can't do that. That's an attention killer. The advertising's not going to come. I'm going to give them a bit more of, this stupid thing was said by this MP, and that will lead the charts, right? And I think you optimize to your audience. And I think if you look at the last campaign, or there's a lot of debate about what tripped Pierre Poilievre up, but he was so fed into that persona that he was online that he couldn't pivot when the world gave him a vastly different test question to answer. And I think, that's when you're defined by the media, that's tricky because you don't hold the pen. But fair-minded observers usually paint a fairly accurate picture of who you are over time. When you do that yourself online, you hold the pen, but your incentives are to double down and be not quite the worst version of yourself, but the most popular version of yourself to your audience. And quite often that audience, like meat space, cyberspace, that you're still preaching to the converted on these platforms. And politics is still, it's somewhat a game of finding people who aren't in your camp. Mark Carney found a lot of people who weren't in his camp, whether NDP or Bloc, and brought them over because he was less like Donald Trump than Pierre Poilievre was. So I think, like, to your point about danger, you have to resist the temptation to cast yourself so firmly with these platforms.
The incredible thing for me to observe, as not a guy who's in politics, but a guy who's adjacent to politics, and to watch it, what you were saying a minute ago about SNC, the India trip, things like that, like when the Trudeau government began to kind of really accumulate its first major scandals, it would be like you'd have like a very straight news story that day, like PM responds to controversy over appointment scandal. Yeah. But all the photo options in like the Reuters or Canadian Press archive were him with this massive shit-eating grin, like taking a selfie. And like you could get a very normal, dry picture of him at a lectern with a Canadian flag behind him. But no, you never did that because that was boring. So you'd grab this picture. And I remember at the time talking to someone who was a senior Liberal advisor at the time, and they were telling me, I was telling them this stuff would come back to haunt us eventually because we have just reams of databases of photos of the Prime Minister looking jaunty. And sooner or later, one of these pictures is going to be juxtaposed with like IED kills 14 Canadian troops, and it's going to kill us. And they really, to some extent, built a version of Justin Trudeau that could not forever survive reality. And I think Carney, though, so far is doing a better job of that. But I think what you've been seeing is almost a withdrawal of a lot of politicians. Like, I don't know if there's any politician who exposes themselves, no pun intended, on social media as much as Trudeau did. I think they've all kind of, ooh, that was too much. Now we're going to do almost mini commercials. Like the White House account is regularly pumping out issue-based stuff. Do you hate criminals? We hate them too. It's not all Trump all the time. And Trump's probably pretty high up there in terms of the personal exposure. So you had a really interesting proposal, and I'm a free markets guy, and I hate the idea, except I'm actually convinced you were the first person to come up with an idea that I think might save us, because this is where we're getting a little bit dystopian here. I have a sneaking suspicion that we have outsmarted ourselves, that we've invented a technology that is so optimized to hack our brains, we will be incapable of stopping it. I have said before, semi-jokingly, that we should turn the internet off. That we should just go, you know what? We've learned a lot. This is great, but we're going to shut it down for 5, maybe 10 years. And then we'll build Internet 2.0, and we're going to apply all the lessons we've learned. The problem is you can't do that because society would collapse. We're too dependent on it for supply chains and finances and communication. But can we turn social media off? Probably not, for corporate reasons. Okay. So how do we actually meaningfully fix it? You've come up with an idea that is elegant in its simplicity. How do we maybe start to put this thing back inside a box that doesn't destroy civilization?
Yeah, I think the short answer is what figure out what you don't like about this. And then for me, that's the amount of time we spend willingly, unwillingly on this, and the business models that are built on free at the point of sale, but they make their money off us on engagement.
Yeah.
So if you then why don't if you tax the revenues, we've seen what these platforms will do. They'll throw a fit. They'll threaten to take the toys away from everybody. They'll ship the revenue to another market so you can't get it. Donald Trump will get all upset. He'll call you and yell at you about taking down these great tech companies. So that probably not going to happen. In a perfect world, we'd pay for these things. We would make a conscious decision of, is this service worth my time, as we have with virtually everything else that we do and spend money on. But if engagement is the problem, and engagement for young people is a problem, if we had a system that taxed on how long we're on these things and how active we are while we're on them, you'd probably have a pretty good proxy to match the bad design practices of these platforms, of the attention economy that put these product features on the platforms to keep you engaged. So think of swiping on TikTok. The system requires you to show your preference, and you're on there for an hour. You're swiping probably 120 times on that, versus if you're on YouTube and you find a film that you haven't seen and you click once and you watch for 2 hours straight, that's probably a better indication of you sinking into something. And so, between the McDougall Laurier Institute, and look, we had a pretty fierce battle between us about what to do about this. And the paper is very much a compromised position of, if we can't have a price signal in this market that the government sticks in there, could we do an engagement-based tax, since we track all this stuff anyway on these platforms? And that would at least show people, oh my God, like we all see the screen counts on your phone. You go, oh, I spent that much time. But I think if you were to granularly show people how many swipes they made on a platform and how much time they spent on a screen, they would then at least be able to have a conversation with themselves going, is this worth it? Is my attention worth it? Should I pay Facebook $10 a month for what it gives me? Or should I rely on them to come up with product features like infinite scroll, autoplay, and a host of others that keep me on that platform for the sole purpose of extracting money from me via advertising partners? We pay the cost, Matt. It's just, do we take a deliberate decision to pay up front? Or do we get monetized after the fact? And that ruthlessness in pursuing our attention leads to business models that are based on addiction, not utility. Facebook does not care anymore if it connects me in the best way with people I need to be connected to. It cares about, can I keep this guy here long enough to make a few bucks off him? And I will do whatever it takes, showing whatever content I can find to keep him there.
There's an old sketch, Chris Rock. You probably remember it. This is 20 years ago, but he says, we don't need gun control. We need bullet control. If every bullet cost $1 million, there'd be no shootings. And when I was reading your piece, I was thinking, if every TikTok swipe cost 25 cents, people would get off TikTok. If every Instagram reel was 15 cents to view, you'd be a lot more choosy about which ones you clicked on. And I think you and I are obviously fairly far out there in the skeptics of social media, but let's actually flip it around for a minute. I derive value from social media. There are things about social media I like. There are social benefits. It allows me to stay in touch with people. I have nieces, nephews that I don't get to see as much as I like, and photos and group chats allow the family to be connected. My son's hockey team, there are accounts for putting up cool clips and info for parents, and et cetera, et cetera. There is a lot of stuff on this stuff that I like, and I would pay for that. If I had to pay a nominal fee to see photos of my nephew, to see my kids' hockey team, to stay in touch with friends around the world, I would do that. I would pay a nominal fee to use something like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, whatever, to broadcast my professional content to a broader audience, because then that would draw in eyeballs and I would monetize those eyeballs. That would be a service, a business fee there. What I don't need is the empty calories junk food of lying in bed at 1:30 in the morning going, scroll, scroll. And then I think on top of that, we have to add in the fact that we've touched on this, but we haven't really done it in a deep way. Our geopolitical enemies know us better than we know ourselves, and they are using this stuff to poison our societies. You know, you mentioned Stasi in your pocket, right? But I mean, Big Brother was supposed to be a cautionary tale. The moment we invented the technology to be under constant surveillance and to have no privacy, we embraced it.
Yeah. And that, like, getting back to Postman, just to interrupt you there, like, his is the theory of amusing ourselves to death is, are we in the Orwellian future of the surveillance state, or are we in the Huxleyan version of just endless pleasure and the stratification of society by those means? And I think we're firmly in Huxley territory there. And yeah, we and more to the point, we've been convinced that it can only be this way. You know, the tech companies tell us, no, it has to be this way. You know, ad supported, algorithmic, it keeps things relevant to you. No, that's the lie they tell us. I decide what's relevant to me. You know, and you can assist me by showing me, like, everybody likes to go to a record store and the guy in the record store goes, "Ooh, if you like that, you probably like this." But that doesn't mean that endless that over time is better than, you know, one of the reasons I still love reading the weekend newspapers is I don't know what news I'm interested in.
Yeah.
I like going across the pages and going, oh, I had no idea I was interested in that 1,000-word feature on this particular village in the north of England that's found a new life after posting. Like, I would not have clicked on that. I would not have scrolled, but I'm better for having read it. And I think the battle will be in, as these things evolve, hopefully, is how do we get curation back in there in a way that has a bit of human touch to it, and more to the point, the accountability and liability of, you know, if you chose to put somebody's views in the National Post as a comment editor, the paper was on the hook for kind of giving a platform to these platforms are not on the hook for any of the content that they put out there. And that's another thing I write about, is you have to, you know, the rules that were invented for the early days of the internet and not strangling it in lawsuits and making it adjudicate all the content. They're the dominant platforms out there now. And you can have free speech. I'm all for that. But there's no rule that says you have to have free reach to everything you say. You know, there is no, just because the incentives, getting back to that, when what travels on these platforms is not reason, it is emotion. So the person with the most stringent take on something, and you and I see this we write something. If I give it a caption, Justin Trudeau's the worst thing ever because X, that will do better than, you know, I think they did a reasonable thing here. You know, and sometimes the news is the reasonable thing was done. And we have these systems now, because they're geared to attention and keeping us on platforms for as long as possible. They have to go with the sensational. And then that just skews everybody that's in that universe. And that's the cycle. When you pay for something, they don't have to do that. They can compete on utility. How do I give you the best version of Facebook that you like for all the reasons you like it? Not how can I addict you? And that's the crack. We have to crack that nut. How do we have to put a price back into this. And the debate needs to be about how, not whether.
One of the obvious, we'll wrap it up in a minute here because I think we've been gabbing for a while, but one of the obvious challenges is, first of all, you would need to do this in an almost comprehensive way. It couldn't be Finland doing it, right? Like you would probably, because then honestly, if it comes down to a fight between any individual Western country, and I include the United States in this, I don't know if the United States government can take on Facebook and win. I honestly don't, in terms of the army of lawyers, the lobbying power, the political reach. But if the United States and the European Union simultaneously decided, as of January 1st, we're moving to a usage-based metering of all of these apps, or a $10 monthly fee, or a 100 app store fee a download, there's different ways of structuring it, right? Yep. But it would need to be a coordinated thing. And that is going to be, especially in the current political environment, that's going to be really hard. One of the concerns I have is that the politicians, the guys who are going to pass these bills, I don't know if they're going to see this in their own best interest, because as we talked about, they've cracked the code on how to use this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that should be the lesson, though. If you look at the G7, G20, for example, and you're all struggling with Donald Trump, you're all struggling to contain his moods, trade, whatever. You have issues with him. What's his superpower? Donald Trump's superpower has always been the same thing. He is completely without shame. The only thing is, in the 80s, when he tried to run for president, shamelessness wasn't in vogue, right? He didn't have an imperial environment. He can be shameless and survive. He didn't. He died. Same thing in 2000 when he ran. What changed in 2010s when he ran is he now had an information economy where he could be as shameless. And more to the point, he was rewarded for that shamelessness. Yeah. And his political power derives from the winged monkeys that he can summon on these. And it started to hurt him on things like Epstein. But he's been able to control that conversation. And if you look around the G7, G20 and you go, now is the time. Like if you're the EU and you're wondering, okay, you want to hit us on goods? Let's have a dance on services, my friends. Because with the regulatory superstate that is the EU, GDPR did change the rules of tech for people around the world. And I think you're exactly right. It's a collective action problem.
Yeah.
Now is the time, if you're struggling with the United States, to join up at a place like a G20 and say, we have some conditions on these companies that are eating the world. And you would find some allies in the States that would do that kind of thing. You know, the Federal Trade Commission lost Lena Khan in the change of administration, but they were having a bit of a moment of what do we do, whether it's an Amazon, a Google, and even Canada's competition regulators going after Google on advertising, which they absolutely should do because they control 90% of the market and both ends of the market, the transaction. There are people fighting these fights. It's about joining them up. And yeah, we have to do it. Now's the time to do it. And one of the things, getting back to something you said, if you unplug the internet or unplug social media, like all addicts, we would Jones a bit for a while, right? But there's enough science out there that shows that ultimately people feel better after they get away from this constant comparison of your life to somebody else's, the relying on validation from people you don't know to make you feel good about yourself. Why didn't I get a like? Why did this thing only get this? Why didn't it get that many? What? You know, that's an awful way to live your life. It is, you have to put your faith in people you see every day and build those relationships, not the people you bump across online over common positions on issues that you might not have anything to do with each other in real life or never need them to help you in real life. And we have to get back to that. And that's a bigger task than one tax or one paper. But until we realize that we're plugged into this matrix that exists not for any, like, that's the thing that kills me, man. When you look at what we've done, which nobody set out to do, if you had told people 20 years ago, we're going to gut the accountability function in the media, we're going to crater our mental health, particularly that of our kids, particularly that of young women, and we're going to gift Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, the North Koreans, the Iranians, open access to our democracies. Also, a few platforms could make tens of billions of dollars in advertising. Nobody would take that trade.
Yeah.
Nobody. And yet here we are making that trade. And the time's come to ask that question, why do we do this to ourselves? And it's tough to get people to have that conversation because it becomes so emotive. And that's why we can't fuss about the outputs of these platforms. It just gets too complicated, too messy, too difficult to do at scale. You have to wind it back to the business model. What creates the incentives that spew out all this content and time online, and tackle the problem there? At least to me, that's where I see the answer.
Yeah, no, I have yet to come up with anything better. You know, I've been thinking about this a lot because there are relatively harmless but still bad outcomes of this stuff. Addiction, as you're talking about, body image problems for young women who compare themselves constantly to supermodels. Loneliness, I think, is one, because you're getting a constant stream of social interaction, but you don't have one true friend. So, like, and these are the things that sounds terrible, but I actually put them on almost the lower side of the harm spectrum, because on the other side, we have deliberate geopolitical weaponization by enemies. We have conspiracy theories.
Who don't, by the way, and this is an important point,
they don't allow this stuff. I know.
Like TikTok in China, Douyin, there is none of the nonsense. Strict time limits, nothing past a certain time. Kids, heavily restricted.
Uh-huh.
In Russia, They stood up a new version of TikTok overnight after they invaded Ukraine to screen out all, like, they don't let this stuff happen. And that should tell us something. And we go, oh no, it's our freedom. It's not. And yeah, man.
I've watched, and I mentioned this to you off the air, and it's kind of a glum note to end on, but in the last few years, I have watched a very old friend of mine go insane. And I'm trying to think of a nicer way to put that, but there isn't. He went insane, and he went insane on a steady drip of information that, for whatever reason, was emotionally triggering for him, but he couldn't look away. Like we all know the expression about like rubbernecking the car crash, right? This app it was a social media app, became a way of causing a car crash on his fucking front lawn every morning.
Yep.
And he could never look away from
the car crash because he engaged with it. Time on screen went up, therefore good, says the app.
The app goes, man, every time we show him one of these stories, he clicks on it and he watches it right through to the end. So we're going to show him another one. And it was almost because, again, a certain irony here, talking about internet technologies. I can scroll back through my text message and chat history with this guy and see that it started at sort of very moderate skepticism and how it ended up with something that is, look, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but in layman's terms, he was paranoid and delusional and functionally insane. And it took about 6 months to go from, hey, I watched this video, to 9/11 was an inside job. The Holocaust didn't happen. mRNAs, nanobots controlling our bodies, and so on and so on. And it happened in 6 months, and it was all algorithmic. And look, he had some comorbidities. There were pre-existing traumas, which might have given him some susceptibility to this. But he'd gone decades of his life without going insane. He downloads an app, and 6 months later, he's a raving lunatic.
That's the speed and scale of this, Matt. And that, I think, is the thing. Our brains are very linear. We don't deal with exponential well. We don't deal with that kind of change. And I think, the quote I opened the paper for the MLI with is E.O. Wilson, and it is, we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology.
Yeah,
it's that combination. Like I said, our brains are still on the savannah. We cannot cope with information processing 24/7, 365. We burn out. Our brains just get tricked. And that's not, that's not our fault. And so it hits some people harder than others. But the fact that we now reach for our phones absent any stimulus, the FOMO, what have I missed? Like, that is such a new thing for us. And the answer for your friend is if you could just put your arms around him and be around a barbecue, having a few beers and roasting some hot dogs and going fishing or going for a walk. That's the kind of connection that humans have flourished under and have. And as we atomize ourselves and our fields of information, we lose our ability to connect with people. And these platforms have never had to answer those hard questions about, why is this worth it? What are you doing about this? They've absolved themselves of all this responsibility under the guise of connection and helping things. And they're not helping things. I don't think everyone there are bad people, but enough people know all the harm. And this is like, you've had all the whistleblowers. We know what these platforms do. If you look in the United States, there are a few attorneys generals of the states who are banding together to take on TikTok and Meta. And if you look at the discovery material from those proceedings, they know exactly how addictive, why it's important to get them younger. It's just like tobacco. It's the same. Like, once they figure out your brain's heuristics and biases and preferences, whether that's multinational food with a combination of salt, sugar, and fat, or information, our brain, why does our brain love sex and good food? Is because you need sex to reproduce and you need food to stay alive. That's why the great creator, whoever that is, made those things feel better than anything else on earth. And now we can have those things all day, every day, and our bodies don't know how to cope. And that goes the same for information as it does for food, as it does for adding compounds to tobacco and nicotine to make it even more addictive. Our brains and our bodies love this shit. They want more. It's the same reward pathway as all these great natural things. It's addiction.
I'm trying to optimize a light speed global data network I'm trying to navigate that. And this thing is algorithmically programmed to feed my own particular kinks and hobbies and weirdnesses. And I'm trying to survive in that environment with a meat computer that is optimized to eat berries.
Yeah.
In the dark.
Exactly, yeah. No, that's not an exaggeration, That's not an exaggeration.
You know what? So I'm going to encourage everyone to go to readtheline.ca, check out Andrew McDougall's recent op-ed for us. There's a link there that goes to his full paper for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I have a feeling we're going to lose this fight, but it's a fight worth fighting. So let's keep plugging away at this. And I'm going to go see what my daughter's posted on Instagram.
Well, thank you for having me on to talk about this. That's the first bit of it, is getting your attention. And I'm glad we've been able to have this conversation. So thank you as ever. And thank you for over the years for platforming me on your publication.
My pleasure. We'll do it again soon. Thanks for coming on.
Cheers.
Well, that's another episode of On the Line. Thanks, of course, to our sponsors, to my guest today, Denys Prevost from Nova Scotia and Andrew McDougall joining me from the United Kingdom in London. Many thanks to you, the listeners. As always, www.readtheline.ca. Whatever app you listened on, give us a like, subscribe, a great review. If it was on YouTube, follow our channel, hit that button. I hear my kids listen to videos. Smash that subscribe button. Well, smash it, folks. Smash it indeed. Share it with your friends. Help spread the good word of The Line. We'll be back with another episode of The Line podcast in just a couple of days. Like and subscribe. We'll talk to you soon.